Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 22nd of June of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians attacked the city of Voronezh. And this is a very interesting attack. We have a lots of very interesting details, and the most important detail is that the city of Voronezh has been attacked by the Ukrainians with cruise missiles, but not with drones. Since the beginning of May, since the beginning of this year, the Ukrainians have carried out hundreds of attacks deep inside of the territory of Russia, mainly using drones. And as for this attack, this is the first attack at least of June, or even at least of since the beginning of May, when the Ukrainians have used just cruise missiles. No drones, not even a single drone was recorded over the territory of the city. The sources reported that the Ukrainians attacked this object of military infrastructure. Pro-Russian sources reported that the Russians are using this facility to produce different equipment for the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Another important thing that the Ukrainians during the 22nd of June of 2026 were also attacking the city of Moscow. The local authorities stated that the Russians managed to bring down up to 70 drones over the territory of the city of Moscow, and obviously this attack served for the Ukrainians as an attempt to distract the Russian attention. So when the Russians decided that the city of Moscow is going to be probably a main direction of attack, the Russians most likely redirected all their air defense forces in this area with the purpose to control drones or to control even missiles. And during this process, the Ukrainians attacked basically the Russians from behind, from behind of their air defense positions, and they attacked the city of Voronezh. And as of the evening of the 22nd of June of 2026, we haven't received even a single report whether the Russians managed to record, to discover, to find, or to bring down even a single missile that was launched by the Ukrainian side. Different military experts stated that the Ukrainians were using the Storm Shadow missiles, and you know that this attack took place almost at the same time when the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, known for his anti-Russian statements and supply for Kiev, has announced his resignation. So several experts came to conclusion that probably this is the last strike of the Prime Minister, or of the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, because from this very moment he will not be able to make anything to Russians, at least when talking about him personally. So these attacks in the direction of Moscow and Voronezh were very powerful from the Ukrainian side, and as we can see, as a result of these attacks, the Ukrainians managed to deal damage. The most important thing is that the Minister of Defense of Ukraine stated that the Russians, for example, during the same period of time, used just 89 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine. So this is the minimal, this is the lowest number since the beginning of the previous week. For example, as for the situation a day ago, on the 21st of June of 2026, we remember that the Ukrainians were attacking the city of Kerch, and as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians also managed to deal significant damage to an object of energy infrastructure of the Russian Federation in this area. Some oil base and a port infrastructure was significantly damaged by the armed forces of Ukraine. Furthermore, the Ukrainians managed to hit air defense positions and so on. And when talking about the Minister of Defense of Ukraine report, they stated that a day ago the Russians used just 100 of drones, more precisely 109 units. 2 days ago, the Ukrainians, using once again hundreds of drones, were attacking different parts of the territory of the Russian Federation. Explosions were recorded through Crimea. Explosions and attacks were recorded through the territory of central part of Russia. And as of the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, the Russians used just 99 drones. And 3 days ago, the Russians used just 90 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine, but the Ukrainians from their side were attacking, for example, different parts of Russia, the southern regions, the territory of Crimea. The Ukrainians were attacking deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation and so on. And according to these things, we see that for some reason the Russians decided to continue remaining cold-minded. The Russians don't retaliate immediately to all these attacks from the Ukrainian side, but due to the fact that every single day the Russians use just 100 700 of drones during the attack. This means that the Russians right now continue the process of accumulation of drones for something bigger. As of the previous week, we can make a conclusion that most likely since the beginning of the previous week, the Russians have already accumulated around 600 or even 700 of drones, or even maybe more. Maybe even the Russians have concentrated already thousands of drones, which means that the Russians have a plan. The Russians have a plan most likely in coming days to carry out a massive attack through the entire territory of Ukraine, using of course drones, thousands of drones, using hundreds of missiles of different types. The question is what exactly the Russians are going to attack during the next massive attack, because the Ukrainians for the same period of time attacked the city of Voronezh, the Ukrainians several times attacked the city of Moscow, the Ukrainians attacked the city of Kerch, the Ukrainians damaged logistics of Russians through the southern regions and so on. And when summarizing everything, we need to understand that something big might happen when the Russians will strike back. And when talking about the same period of time during these days between the between the 17th and the 22nd of June of 2026, the Russians were mainly attacking logistics infrastructure. The Russians were attacking bridges in the southwestern parts of the Odessa region, and as a result of these attacks, most likely the logistics was damaged. Furthermore, the Russians, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, made a test attack on the bridges of the city of Zaporizhzhia. We have already discussed the situation. Once again, I would like to remind you that yesterday the Russians attacked the city of Zaporizhzhia. More precisely, the Russians used 12 aviation bombs with the purpose to attack the bridge infrastructure in the central part of the city. But according to information we found in the internet, in the open source, we came to the conclusion that most likely the Russians missed the target. But one thing is clear: the Russians were testing their capabilities, and the Russians were trying to get an answer to the question whether the Russians are able to hit bridges and to damage them with the purpose to destroy the Ukraine's logistics through the eastern parts of Ukraine. Furthermore, during the same period of time, the Russians continue bombing and attacking logistic hubs, objects of energy infrastructure. For example, for the first time since the end of the winter, the Russians once again attacked the Kharkiv thermal power plant, and as a result of attack, the power station and several substations around were damaged or probably even destroyed. The Russians destroyed almost every single warehouse and logistic hub through the city of Kharkiv. Several days ago, the Russians destroyed the logistic hub in the northern parts of the city of Kharkiv that the Ukrainians used to support their contingent in the northern defensive operation. Furthermore, the Russians destroyed another logistic hub during the previous 24 hours to the west of the city of Kharkiv, and today we received the video where we can see how exactly the Russians were attacking these territories. Furthermore, the Russians destroyed several logistic hubs through the cities of Zaporizhzhia, Sumy, Kiev, and so on. And summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that most likely during the next massive missile attack, the Russians will attack objects of critical infrastructure. Very likely that the Russians will hit more the bridges through the city of Zaporizhzhia. Very likely the Russians would hit bridges in the southwestern parts of the Odessa region, and most likely the Russians will continue attacking gas stations, military facilities, logistic hubs, and so on. The question is when exactly the Russians are going to do this, and how many drones and missiles the Russians are planning to use for these purposes. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction. The previous 24 hours are very interesting when talking about the Kherson direction, because when talking about this area, as you can see, since the beginning of the end of the 21st of June of 2026, we received dozens of videos and dozens of updates about the situation in this area. The Russians intensified their artillery strikes through the city of Kherson and through possible positions of the armed forces of Ukraine along the river of Dnipro, and we haven't seen something similar probably since the beginning or since the end of the battle for the settlement of Krynki, which is located on the Russian side of the river of Dnipro. So it seems, and according to these number of updates, we can make a conclusion that the Ukrainians have concentrated their troops along the border, along the Dnipro river, probably with the purpose either to force the Russians to keep some reserves in the city, with the purpose not to receive perceive a critical situation, or the Ukrainians indeed are planning to cross the river of Dnieper with the purpose to create a foothold on the Russian side. Very difficult to say, but one thing is clear: the Russians are preparing themselves before any scenario. For example, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians attacked the Kazachi island, which is located to the north of the Kinburn Spit. We're talking about this island. This is a very important island because it is impossible for the Ukrainians to land infantry on the territory of the Kinburn Spit without this island. First, the Ukrainians need to bring forces on these islands to store additional equipment, weapons, to have additional equipment for the landing purposes and so on. So if there is a plan of the Kinburn Spit landing operation, first the Ukrainians need to land and to concentrate troops on this island, and only then, using this island, the Ukrainians are able to move further in the direction of this territory. So that is why the Russians began bombing and attacking this island, because probably the Russians know something. Another important thing, that the Russians intensify the use of their Navy drones in the most northwestern parts of the Odessa region. During the previous months, just since the beginning of June, according to different sources, the Russians attacked and destroyed up to 5 vessels, commercial vessels, that were moving either in the direction of Ukraine or from the territory of Ukraine. So up to 5 vessels were attacked by the Russian Navy drones, which means that the Russians right now are trying to concentrate drones on the territory of these northwestern parts of the Black Sea, just with one purpose: to test, to train, to have something like military drills before possible operation from the Ukrainian side. Because if the Ukrainians decide to land infantry on the territory of the Kinburn Spit, the Ukrainians for these purposes would use lots of military ships, boats and so on. And if Russians use Navy drones, of course, attacks of Navy drones can ruin the Ukraine's plans in this area. Another important thing is the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the clashes between Russians and the Ukrainians continue. As for this territory, this is the area of responsibilities of the group of forces Dnipro and the group of forces East, and we haven't received almost anything from these two groups of forces almost since the beginning of May of 2026. For some reason, the Russians are not moving anymore in this area. The Russians are not taking more villages under complete control, which means that the Russians right now are regrouping or trying to wait for something else, or the Ukrainians counterattack. As for possible Ukrainian counteroffensive operation, we have reports that indeed the Ukrainians managed to get the settlement of Stepnogorsk. For example, we can check how the map looked like several months ago. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 30th of April of 2026, and as you can see, the Russians, according to different sources, were already on the territory of the village of Grigorovka and Veselyanka. But later, the Ukrainians launched a counter-offensive operation, and as a result of this counter-offensive operation, the Russians have lost the progress through the western Zaporizhzhia direction. Currently, the Russians once again are fighting for the settlement of Stepnogorsk. But we also see that the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation in this area were stopped by Russians. The Russians managed to bring additional reinforcements and reserves in the direction of the city, and now the Russians began regaining territories they lost as a result of the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation. The Ukrainians probably, according to different sources and according to things that were happening, most likely don't have plans to move further in the southern direction. So that is why the Ukrainians attacked the M18 bridge between the cities of Vasilievka and Kamenska. Today we received this video where we can see how the Ukrainians attacked this bridge and destroyed it. As a result of attack, the bridge was significantly damaged, and later pro-Ukrainian sources, pro-Russian sources and pro-Ukrainian sources published this video where we can see how a civilian was making a video of the situation through the river of Karachorkak, and where the bridge was damaged and destroyed. So as you can see, the Russian logistic between the cities of Vasilievka, Kamensk and Stepnogorsk collapsed. It is now very difficult to say how exactly the Russians are going to support their contingent. Of course, there are additional and extra ways to do this, but obviously this is not the logistic between Vasilievka and Stepnogorsk itself. Now the Russians need to find a way how to do this, and due to the fact that the Ukrainians destroyed this bridge, we believe that the Ukrainians are trying to slow down the Russian counter-offensive operation in the area of the city of Zaporizhzhia, because if you remember, several days ago the president of the Russian Federation stated that the Russian forces are moving closer and closer to the city of Zaporizhzhia itself. Now we see that the Ukrainians are trying to do everything they can with the purpose not to allow the Russians to do this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Lyman-Konstantinovka direction. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes were recorded. Today, the Russians published this video where we can see how exactly the clashes for the northern parts of the settlement of Konstantinovka were taking place. And here we can see two Russian soldiers that raised two Russian flags at right exactly at this point. And based on this video, we have adjusted the map. The Russians continue advancing, and currently the Russians control up to 95% of the city, and the Russians are about to force the Ukrainians to fall back further in the northern direction. But as for the northern parts of the city of Konstantinovka, we can say that physically this is a northern parts of the city of Konstantinovka physically, right? But telling the truth, this part of the city of Konstantinovka is already the southern part of the Alexeyevo-Druzhkovka defensive line. So this is already a part of the Alexeyevo-Druzhkovka defensive line, which means that the Ukrainians during the previous 2-3 months managed to improve their positions, or were trying to improve their positions through this area significantly with the purpose not to allow the Russians to get to the southern outskirts of the settlement of Alexeyevo-Druzhkovka. And most likely it will take time before Russians finish the battle for the most northern part, because this is already a part of the next defense layer of the armed forces of Ukraine. Another important battle is the city of Lyman. During the previous 24 hours, as you can see, the map has been adjusted once again. This is the end of the 21st of June of 2026, and this is the end of the 22nd of June of 2026. Today, pro-Russian sources published this video where we can see how exactly the clashes for the southern and the southeastern micro districts were taking place. In this video, we can see dozens of strikes with FPV drones, and through the final part of this video, we can see at least 4 episodes where Russian soldiers were raising the Russian flag through the southeastern and the eastern parts of the city of Lyman. Based on this video, we made just a small adjustment, one in the southern parts of the area, and these are the changes on the ground. Furthermore, several pro-Russian sources stated that the Russians began their final offensive operation with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back completely from the territory of the city of Lyman, and with the purpose to Russians be able to announce complete control over the settlement. So very likely that the battle for the city of Lyman will be finished much faster in comparison with the city of Kupiansk, and probably a gap would be around a week. The Russians most likely during this week will announce complete control over the territory of Lyman, and then the Russians will continue offensive operation with smaller groups towards the river of Seversky Donetsk with the purpose to establish complete control over the territory. And the question is whether the Russians are going to move further to cross the river and to begin the Slaviansk northern offensive operation, or the group of forces west will take additional troops that would be released as a result of the end of the battle for the city of Lyman, and they will redeploy them in the northern direction with the purpose to finish the battle for the southern Kupiansk direction or for the Barova pocket. If you ask my opinion, I believe that due to the situation that the Russians still need time to finish the battle for the city of Konstantinovka and then for the settlement of Alexeyevo-Druzhkovka, which means that the Russians have a month, somewhere approximately a month, before they finish these two battles through the southern Konstantinovka direction. I believe that Russians would use this time to finish the battle through the most southern parts of the river of Oskol with the purpose to establish complete control over the Russian side of the rivers of Oskol and Seversky Donetsk. As of now, the Russians have already begun the preparation of this possible offensive operation. The Russians during the previous days destroyed lots of pontoon bridges along the rivers of Seversky Donetsk and Oskol with the purpose to ruin the Ukraine's logistics and not allow the Ukrainians either to move forces in this area or to take them away from these territories. So this is probably the plans of the group of forces west till till the end of July of 2026, right? Till the moment when the final battle for this Lyman Konstantinovka agglomeration begins. And according to my understanding of the situation, the final battle for this Lyman Druzhkovka agglomeration will start somewhere in the second part of August, and the Russians would try to finish this battle till the end of the 2026. Now let's talk about the Kharkiv direction, about the northern directions. The Russians continue advancing along the river Voskol in the area of the city of Kupiansk. Additional changes on the ground were recorded in this area. The Russians continue sending their troops further in the direction of the river, trying to check the territory and to be sure that there are no more Ukrainians in this area. But at the same time, we still have reports that some territories along the river of Voskol are still under complete Ukrainian control. At the same time, we see that the news around the northeastern Kharkiv direction is tightening. The Russians continue their offensive operation from the river of Volcha in the direction of the settlement of Bilyi Kolodyaz. This is the first offensive road. Furthermore, the Russians intensify their offensive operation from the area of the border and the river of Voskol. And the Russians are moving both in the direction of the central part of the most northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. And it seems that the Russians would try to meet their claws somewhere in this area, somewhere between the settlements of Bilyi Kolodyaz and Serediny Burluk and something like this. And this is going to be the end for the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region, and from these positions the Russians would continue offensive operation further back in 2022 with the purpose to restore control over the territories they lost during the Ukraine's counter-offensive operation of 2022. And somewhere probably at the same time the Russians will finish the battle for the most northern parts of the Kharkiv region, and they will be able to continue advancing further in the southern direction towards the settlements of Dergachi and Bogodukhov, which are located to the northwest and west of the city of Kharkiv. As for the city of Sumy, we expect in coming days reports from the group of forces north about the situation through the second defense layer of the city of Sumy. We're talking about the territories between the settlements of Khotin, Pisarevka, Volzhanskaya, Novosich, and many other different villages to the north of the city of Sumy. In coming days, the group of forces north probably will confirm control over one of these villages, or probably over 2 or 3 villages at the same time. The Russians continue offensive. As for the northern directions, the Russians continue attacking positions and logistics of the armed forces of Ukraine. During the previous 24 hours, lots of videos were published on this matter, how new Russian drone units were attacking different positions and different objects of energy infrastructure through the northern region of Ukraine. As we can see, the conflict continues, and I would like to also remind you that up to 9 days left or 8 days left before ultimatum issued by the President of Ukraine Zelensky to the President of the Republic of Belarus Lukashenko expires, and according to his promises, Zelensky would try to remove the equipment installed by Russians along the border between the Republic of Belarus and Ukraine. And I would like to remind you that today, according to different sources, the President of the Republic of Belarus and the President of the Russian Federation agreed to have a call in coming days to discuss all these words said by the President of Ukraine Zelensky, with the purpose probably to create a common position and to give a common statement on this matter. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.